Now we're on to the good stuff, the actual outline for the speech. So now it's time to write your introduction. Now, your introduction, of course, has three parts, the usual. You have the hook, you have the background information, and you have the thesis statement. Now, I like to differentiate between the hook and the attention grabber for the persuasive speech. It may be that you've decided to use statistics. It's whatever you choose to make it, but you must have a hook first. So if you decide that your attention grabber will be a story, that's fine. But your first sentence is going to be the hook. So you have to really work at making the first sentence grab attention. Now, I would say the one that I did was not the best hook. No, because I think I just said, there was I waiting for, wondering if she would pick up on the phone, wondering if she would pick up the phone. That's not dynamic. But I do remember that Tam in my Wednesday class had mentioned something like, I stood staring at the phone. Something about staring at the phone. Those of you who are in the Wednesday class, you remember. Now, that is an example of an introduction that kind of makes you wonder. So you're going to make sure that your first sentence inspires curiosity. And it's okay if you don't have the hook when you're just starting your outline. Most times for me, I have to wait until I'm finished with the entire outline, and then I go through a series of hooks that I think, should I start with? But the hook is really the hardest part. Just being sure, what's that first sentence that I am going to say to make my audience start to look and get curious. That tends to be a bit hard, but you have to have the hook. You have to have the usual credibility and all of that. So maybe I should have put hook and attention grabber. Yeah, hook and attention grabber. And I guess I should also mention the part where you have to have your topic, you have to do your credibility, and you have to make it relevant, and the relevant statement, you have to make it relevant to the audience. But you have to make sure that you've provided enough background information for your audience to understand your thesis statement. Now, some people tell a story, and the story helps to define the problem, the effect on people, and mentions the solution. That's fine. But whatever you do, when you're finished with your introduction, I want you to look at this part. And I want you to focus and ask yourself, have I defined the problem and why it's important? Have I explained the effect on people? And have I mentioned the need for solutions? You don't need to tell the actual solutions yet, but you need to hint at us needing to find solutions. And once you've defined the problem, the effect, and the solution in your introduction, make sure pathos is there. So once you define the problem, ask yourself, have I added enough pathos? Once you talk about the effect, have I added the effect with pathos? And have I added pathos with the solutions? Because remember, when it comes to the persuasive speech, we're going for pathos. We must have that emotional connection. Nobody is going to care unless they first feel something. We make sure that they feel, and then we give them the facts. We don't give the facts over the emotion, okay? So the introduction must grab our attention, and we must begin to feel. I would say you grab our attention in the first 5 seconds, and then by the time we get to 20 seconds, we should be feeling something. So time it and time yourself, okay? And when you have done all of that, you're ready to then say, today I'm going to talk to you about, and the word sustainability must be there because this is a sustainability speech. If you find that you've come up with a thesis statement and sustainability can't fit into it, then it's a wrong thesis statement because you must be able to say, I'm going to talk to you about the sustainability of. And you have to decide, what do you think wants to be sustained? And a sustainability speech only makes sense when the problem is a real problem. And you know that if the problem is not addressed, we are going to be in danger later on. It's like the recycling situation. If we don't recycle, what's going to happen to this earth, this world in 10 years? So you're also saying, I believe in the sustainability of friendship, the sustainability. You remember Robin, who did the speech on donating blood. She's saying this is how we're going to sustain life. You know, you may be saying this is how we're going to sustain education, whatever it is. Your thesis statement must say, I am going to talk about the sustainability of. I'll tell you the problem, I'll tell you the effect, and I'll tell you the solutions. Paraphrase it, say it however you want to say it. The word sustainability must be there, but how you tell us how you mention the problem, effect, solution part, that's up to you. Use synonyms if you want, but we must get a sense that this is going to be a problem, effect, solution speech. And of course, when you say that, you pause and then you go into your transition. Now, let me begin by first explaining to you this problem. That's your transition. My words, you choose your words, okay? Now we are at main body point 1. You must begin with a topic sentence. Even if there is going to be a definition following, you must have a topic sentence that says something about the problem. Now, when you're building your problem paragraph, you need to decide on the controlling idea that you are comfortable with. You cannot mention everything. So the problem paragraph usually tells us the causes of the problem or the significance of the problem or why the problem is troubling, why the problem is frustrating, why the problem is harmful. But you must choose an angle. Will you be talking about why it's troubling? Or will you be talking about the causes of the problems? You can't talk about everything, but your goal is to show that this is a huge problem. So decide on which angle you want to take and make sure your topic sentence reflects it. So once you have done your topic sentence, you are ready to give your explanation or supporting details. And this is where you are going to make sure to include logos and pathos. I've put pathos in uppercase merely because most times I get logos and I don't get pathos. But you have to find a happy balance between the two. Now back to Nancy Duarte's textbook. She has a list here and she just calls it strike a balance. Yeah. So she says that when you're thinking about the analytical part, which is the logos, you could be thinking about things like features, data, evidence, exhibits, logical arguments, proofs, examples, case studies. But when you're thinking of the emotional part, you are going to be talking about, you're going to be showing maybe some benefits that you will illustrate through stories. And if you're using stories, it can be personal, It can just be true stories about other people's lives. It can be fictional. You may want to do a fable, but you're going to always think in terms also of that emotional appeal. It could be metaphors and analogies that make the data, pop. It could just be thought-provoking questions. It could be some kind of slow reveal, kind of the way Steve Jobs operated, or it could even just be a visual where it's so powerful and it reaches us, So for every body point, think of the analytical and the emotional. In other words, think of logos and think of pathos. Now, there's another thing that she speaks about, which is what is and what can be. And if you're thinking of comparing and contrasting, that's what you are doing. This is how things are now, but this is how things can be. And you want to do that in every body paragraph and even in the introduction. What is, what can be? What is, what can be? What is, what can be? And as you build your speech, keep asking yourself, have I shown what is and what can be? For those of you who care, if you Google Nancy Duarte, Duarte, Nancy Duarte, if you look for her TED Talk, she speaks about the same what is, what can be. It was really a very powerful speech. I think she did this over 10 years ago, but it really is impactful and it's very useful. And her TED Talk is basically how to give a good talk, I think. It's not those words, but that's really what she was doing. She looked at a few great speeches like Martin Luther King, and she looked at what they did, and she came up with this. What is, what can be? What is, what can be? So that's something you can think about. And she also came up with what she calls a persuasive story pattern. What is, what can be? What is, what can be? What is, what could be? So it is believed that in a persuasive speech, you don't want to keep people high, where emotions are high all the time. And you certainly don't want it to be low. And I will tell you, most of the speeches that I get every year are just on a low level. They're just informing you about things. Information doesn't help us. Information only does not help us when we're trying to persuade an audience. So we want to toggle between what is, what can be, what is, what can be. So try to make sure you incorporate it in every section of your speech. The beginning, not as much, but certainly in the middle, every body point. What is, what can be, what is, what could be, what could be, what is, what could be. And then you end with the new bliss. What can be. And that's when you're going to be giving your call to action. Okay. Another thing that should be a part of your body paragraph is where you incorporate sources properly. Do not begin the point with a source. Do not. You have to make the point first with the topic sentence. Explain it a bit, then incorporate the source. Sometimes students make the source information the topic sentence or the first sentence. That is actually incorrect. I have a video where I show you how to properly incorporate sources. And I basically just have taken it from the college's Learning Center website. That's all. But that is what is required for academic sources. So if you don't want to watch the video, let me just quickly tell you what it says. Make the point, explain the context, provide the author lead-in where you say, and this is supported by Professor Tanya Hay. Then you give the quote, then you're not writing it, so you don't necessarily have to document it, but you have to explain it, interpret it, explain it, and discuss it, and then you finish with the conclusion. That is actually all that's involved when you're using sources. Don't just throw it in, because if you throw it in, you better make sure there's someone to catch it. Okay, so integrate your sources properly. And speaking of sources, when you're doing your persuasive speech, there should be a source, at least one source in each body point. It's not your thoughts only. It has to be academic or credible sources. Okay? And you must say it, according to the Red Cross Society, or this is supported by Nancy Duarte or whoever, but you need to say it. You need to write it, where on your outline it shows the source, APA style, and at the end of the outline, you should have your reference page with all the sources that you used. If you don't know how to use a reference page, Google it. Put in APA, how to do APA, or go to Purdue website, but do not make it up. You will lose marks for making it up. I get that all the time. Students have it numbered. You don't number a reference page. Or it's not in an alphabet, it's just random names and it's no alphabetical order. It has to be in alphabetical order. Sometimes they underline it. Do not underline. Okay? Don't make it up. If you don't know what to do, Google it. Okay? Okay? And now you want to also try to anticipate objections. If it's a persuasive speech, there's going to be objections. So every body point, you need to quickly address the objections. Don't give it more than 2 sentences, but you need to do that because it shows that you are fair-minded. If you are trying to convince me about something that I don't believe in, I want to know that I can trust you. And I will feel you are trustworthy if you mention the opposite side, because it will show me that you have done your homework. And it's important. Your ethos is very important. And that helps to add to your ethos, okay? Now, back to Nancy Duarte's book. She tells us about 3 types of resistance that people have when they listen to speeches. It could be logical, it could be emotional, or it could be practical. Now, when you've come up with your points, you need to decide on one, at least one type of resistance that people could have. Is it logical? Are they looking at your arguments and are they saying, I don't know. And are they not agreeing because of the logic of it? Or is it because of the emotional aspect? Is it that they have inherent biases? Or is it because it's a practical resistance? You want them to do something and they're saying, but physically, how am I going to do it? I live in Canada and you're talking about doing something in Eastern European country or wherever. So figure out what you think the resistance is, and that will help you when you're planning your speech. And then when you've done all of that, look back at the thesis and the warrant that you identified and make sure that you tie them together. And then you end with your concluding sentence. It's a lot. I know. I'm just telling you what to do to get an A. I'm just telling you. Okay? Now, once you've done all of that, then you transition and you do the same thing for every body point. So the next body point would be the effects. You do all the things we spoke about, topic, sentence, blah, 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 blah. And then you do it for the solution. And when you're doing the solution part, you especially want to transition where you say something like, I've told you the problems, I've told you the effects. Now let us start to think about some solutions. You really want to make it very clear that you're no longer talking about the bad stuff. No, you're talking about the good stuff. So have a very clear transition to the solutions. And you go through all the steps that we spoke about for the first body point. And then you are ready to conclude. Now, I find that most times conclusions are weak in general, and especially for the persuasive speech. And when you have a weak conclusion, then it basically negates what you did before. You want to finish strong. So I'm going to tell you 4 strategies that can help you when you're writing your conclusion for the persuasive sustainability speech. So I'm working with the textbook, another textbook now, Longman series. I'm so sorry I don't have the name of the textbook, but when I am editing the video, I will display the name of the textbook. How could I forget it? Anyway, these are not my original thoughts. And these are examples from a problem effect solution speech they had, and it's talking about attending college. So because I'm doing this for college students, I thought it would be applicable. So let's look at some techniques that you can use. The first one you can do is a prediction. So of course, for your conclusion, first you paraphrase the thesis statement. So you start. So in conclusion, today we spoke about blah, blah, blah. That's the first thing you do. Next, you're going to find a technique to close. We're not talking about emotionalizing it yet. We're just talking about a technique, which could be a prediction. For example, we have now seen how the costs of attending college have been rising, while at the same time, sources of financial aid for students have been disappearing. If this trend continues, fewer and fewer families will be able to send their children through 4 years of college. That's a prediction. Okay? Now, that was a prediction, but there is another strategy, which is when you suggest results or consequences. For example, to sum up, the cost of attending college are up and financial aid for students is down. Fewer and fewer future members of the workforce are able to educate themselves beyond high school. As a result, the nation will waste the intelligence, imagination, and energy of a large segment of the present college-age generation. That's telling you the results and the consequences. So there's another strategy that you can use after the actual suggestion paragraph. But for the conclusion, you can either suggest a solution, make a recommendation, or call for action. We're going for the call for action, though, for the sustainability speech. So here's an example. It is clear that the U.S. system of higher education is in trouble. For many students, 4 years of college is no longer possible because of increasing costs and decreasing financial aid. To reverse this trend, we must demand that government increase its financial support of colleges and universities and restore financial aid programs. Our future depends on it. And a fourth strategy is when you quote an authority on the topic. In conclusion, costs are rising and financial aid is declining, with the result that many can no longer afford to go to college. If our nation is to prosper, increased government funding for education is essential, even if it requires higher taxes. As Horace Mann argued in his 5th annual report, a nation's economic wealth will increase through an educated public. It is therefore in the self-interest of business to pay the taxation for public education. So that's when you have a conclusion that quotes an authority on the topic. So think of your conclusion as having 3 parts. The part where you say in conclusion and you repeat the thesis, and then where you decide on one of these strategies, and then the actual ending where you call for action, and then you kind of have an emotional ending. Okay, so when you're doing your conclusion, you want to keep this pattern in mind, where when you end on a high of what can be. So you're finding a last sentence or two that keeps us not in the negative, but in the positive, right? So you're ending on a high. You start on a low and you take us through this journey of what is, what can be, what is, what could be, what is, what could be, what is, what could be. And then you summarize in your conclusion. Then you choose a pattern to take us to the finish line. And when we get to the finish line, it is the new bliss and what can be. Now, when you've done all of that, you are ready for step 3. I know you're not yet done, but you've planned a speech and you're happy with it. And you've gone back and decided on your hook. Because at this point, you're ready. You're now sure of the hook. And you have to spend a little bit of time asking yourself, what do I want to communicate at the beginning of my speech? There's a book that I would recommend. It's outdated now, I think, but it's only about the beginnings. It's called Better Beginnings: How to Capture Your Audience in 30 Seconds. And you have to really sit down and figure out what you want your audience to be feeling at the beginning of your speech. Where do you want to take them? And this book has a few examples of the kind of start that you could do. It could be, you could go for anticipation, specificity, inquiry, incongruity, novelty, uncertainty, complexity, indulgence, whatever. But you want to wow people, and you want to start with the most dynamic start, the most interesting way that you can. And you want to not be too self-conscious. So you really have to practice this. If you can, before you do your speech, listen to Martin Luther King. I normally ask students to listen to it before the persuasive speech, because it gives you some ideas of what you can say and how you can say it. And I know everybody doesn't have the same personality, so I'm not telling you to become this Martin Luther King person now, but you have to perform. You can't read or sound like you're reading. And if you want a quality speech, it's going to call for a little bit, okay, a lot of performing, okay? And when you are finished with the second stage, which is when you write your outline, now it's time to revise your outline. And when you revise your outline, this is when you are going to add all the rhetorical devices. And in addition to that, you're going to be labeling for your sake and for mine, but you're going to label it, because when you label your outline, it helps you to see if you caught all the areas that need to be caught. And I need to see it because I'm marking you for that. And if it's not on your outline, unfortunately, it does mean that you'll be losing 1 or 2 marks. So on your outline, you're going to have your rhetorical devices. You're going to show me the resistance so that I can see. And it's very useful too, because sometimes when you're speaking, you forget parts. If I see it on the outline, I will be marking you as if you said it. I mean, I want you to say it, but if you forget 1 or 2 things, but it's on your outline, so I know that you planned for it, then it helps to go towards your mark. Because if you don't say it and it's not on your outline, then you never thought about it, right? So label to show me where's logos and where's pathos. That is something I always ask for. What I've never asked for before is labeling the resistance, because you've never had resistance before. So when you write your speech, if it's emotional resistance or logical resistance, make a note of it so I can see what it is that you are trying to achieve. You also want to show me where you have placed your visuals or where you plan to, because sometimes we speak also and we forget the visuals. But if your outline shows me that you were planning to use a visual here and you don't use it, then I can say to you at the end, let me see the visual that you had planned. And then I could think, and then I'll think, okay, yeah, well, you had the visual planned out, you just forgot it. So, of course, and every reference and your reference page must be there, okay? So, very involved speech, I know. I know. So for those of you who watched this speech by my student, Trisha, my past student, the one that spoke about the sustainability of friendliness to strangers, in Blackboard, you can click on her speech and you can click and see her outline and her working outline and her speaking outline. When you're watching the video, you'll see that I didn't do it because I don't have those skills, but she integrated the outline on the left side of her speech of the actual video, and on the right side you see her. But you can actually look at her outline if you click on it through Blackboard. It takes you to Google Docs. But this is what it's going to basically look like. And you'll see where she shows where she paused. And then, here she says, stop video. And that's what you have to do. It helps you. So, she underlined all like her alliteration, etc. Only thing she forgot to do was label it and say what it is. I need you to actually label it. So the slippery slope, that sounds like alliteration there, but you want to make sure that you show me what each part is doing, so I know what you were thinking. You also want to keep in mind that for persuasive messages, they must follow AIDA. I think I told everybody AIDA or AIRA. So think of your speech as being huge at the beginning, broad, wide. You grab attention. You give people enough information to get them interested. And then you build the interest in the body. And you deepen their desire by reducing their resistance. So right here, you reduce resistance and then you call for action. So make sure that AIDA is something you have in mind. And you must ask yourself, did I grab attention? Have I built the interest? Have I reduced resistance? And have I asked for action? When you've done all of that, now you're ready to, you're not practicing yet. You're going to make sure that you've now chosen the rhetorical devices for maximum impact.